I'm live. Okay, I'm going to read from Pete Walker's book. I've been doing this for over a week now. This book here, The Tao of Fully Feeling, and it's by Pete Walker. He also wrote the book Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. So anybody out there who has complex PTSD, which is a response to events from childhood that were traumatic, be it verbal abuse, physical abuse, or sexual abuse over long periods of time, or even short periods of time. Generally, we need to be able to get to understand through psychoeducation so that eventually we begin to, the split that's been caused, with the soul. It's like we have a split in ourselves. We basically have what's called arrested development, and we have quite a hard time because we don't understand what's going on. So although we can have therapy and other modalities, I have found that with psychoeducation, I've really begun to go to another level. So I'm going to read, and it's called Self Compassionate Reparenting. And the whole point of this is that when we've not been parented in a loving, healthy, nurturing way, we don't know how to do that for ourselves. So it's a relearning, and we can feel resentful that we may have to do this, that, the resentment that we have to reparent ourselves. But the work that we put in as adults in understanding self-compassionate reparenting means that our lives begin to improve. So I'm going to start reading. So Pete Walker says from this book, he says that self-compassionate reparenting is a term I have coined to describe my approach to remothering and refathering the inner child. So the inner child is the child that's within us. When we practice self-compassionate reparenting, we identify and provide for the unmet needs of our childhood so that we can grow into more complete life-loving human beings. Self-reparenting rescues us from being needlessly frozen in old childhood fear and deprivation. When we understand how childhood abuse and neglect left us developmentally arrested, empathy naturally arises and motivates us to care for and protect ourselves. As this occurs, we commonly discover that our maturation process was suspended at various different stages of our development, and that we have a number of inner children awaiting our kindness and protection. So an example would be, you take a 3-year-old and you're abused as a 3-year-old really harshly and in a negative way. That means that you've got a 3-year-old inside you that needs to be loved and cherished and nurtured. This can also happen if you were 8 years old. You've got an 8-year-old that wasn't allowed to play or wasn't allowed to be themselves. So throughout our own history, we'll see at what points we became developmentally arrested, he calls it. It's where we're not able to be ourselves, so we cut off and we split off from our true self. I'm going to continue reading. He said, as this occurs, we commonly discover that our maturation process was suspended at various different stages of our development, and that we have a number of inner children awaiting our kindness and protection. Among these are the inner infant, the inner toddler, and the inner preschooler, and so on. These distinctions are important because children have different needs at different developmental stages, and these correspond with a variety of different reparenting tasks. Next page. He says, many survivors are uncomfortable with the concept of the inner child because they were forced at an early age to become miniature adults and to hate their childlike characteristics as much as their parents did. Survivors who do not like their inner children, or children in general for that matter, are often those who were not liked as children. Many of us were so traumatized for being and acting childlike when we were children that we had to move from toddlerhood to adulthood in astoundingly brief periods of time. Various combinations of shame, punishment, and abandonment forced us to forfeit childhood and to act like grown-ups even before we were ready for school. He says, Hal and Sindra Stone elaborate on this. Perhaps the most universally disowned self in our civilized world is the vulnerable child. Yet this vulnerable child may be our most precious subpersonality, the closest to our essence, the one that enables us to become truly intimate, to fully experience others, and to love. When a child is not allowed to be a child, she abandons, and this goes for he as well. When a child is not allowed to be a child, she abandons her child self and banishes it to her unconscious and tries to behave like an adult. Many of us find it difficult to get an authentic sense of our inner child because that part of ourselves is like hiding somewhere out of our awareness, much like the actual child who had to hide in the closets or bedrooms to escape abuse. The child self often stays sequestered in the unconscious because the adult survivor, like the biological parents, reviles in whenever it emerges into awareness, seeking help or attention. So, for example, you might think that you might go into grief, or you might feel sorry for yourself, or you might, be sort of tearful about something, and then you will have this inner critic that will annihilate you and tell you what, a stupid idiot you are, or there's something wrong with you. So the work that we do with dealing with CPTSD really it has to be psychoeducation along with other things, because if there's no psychoeducation, we don't understand the process of what's actually taken place. And this was when I read this book, it was very hard for me to read. And, then the real awareness of just how, awful my childhood was, as an example. So for people out there that want to heal, this book is a must, The Tao of Fully Feeling. He goes on to say, inner children everywhere languish in the unconscious, awaiting our compassion for their terrible plight. Self-compassionate reparenting begins with the decision to love our inner child and protect it from self-abuse. As the healthy parenting, self-compassionate reparenting is a complex, multi-dimensional task, the full exploration of which is outside the scope of this book. More global information on self-reparenting is contained in Jeremy Abraham's excellent collection of writings on the subject, Reclaiming the Inner Child. So I don't know that book, but I'll find the link for that and I'll put it below in the comments at the end of the video, or not the comment section, but the more section below. He says, for the purposes of becoming more fully feeling, we will focus here primarily on the emotional tasks of the reparenter. So we were the abused and we become the reparenter. We become the parent of our inner child. These constellate around two crucial goals: the recovery and ongoing development of the inborn sense of self-acceptance and the re-establishment and strengthening of our instinctive sense of self-protection. I find it useful to label these two tasks as self-mothering and self-fathering, respectively. There are two reasons for this. The first is that its distinction helps clarify the difference between the two key processes of emotional caretaking: unconditional love and unrelenting self-protection. So if you think about it, and I would myself, I've not had children, but if I did, I would give that child, as a baby, unconditional love, and I would give it full-on protection. So I can't imagine that people do have babies and they don't protect them and they don't nurture them and they don't love them, but this goes on in the world. So continuing reading, he says, the first is that this is somewhat, he says, we're clarifying here the differences. Sorry, I missed my place. The second is that the inner child often expects to receive these two different types of emotional support along traditional gender lines. Although these distinctions are sexist and false, the inner child is often not capable of being politically correct about them. He often dreams of having a mummy who is tender and a daddy who stands up for him. Once again, I make this distinction as a teaching aid, and whether or not you find it useful, you can become your own key source of both loving tenderness and fierce protectiveness, regardless of your gender. Men can imagine themselves rocking or breastfeeding their inner infant, just as a woman can imagine themselves fighting off anyone who is threatening to their inner child. This is similar to what occurs in a functional family. Both biological parents share in the mothering and fathering of their children, and both move easily and flexibly between the roles of tenderness and strength. I am happy and heartened to see many of my friends who are parents moving towards a greater balance in these roles. So then he goes on to say, he says, reparenting begins with forgiving the inner child. It sometimes seems outlandish to me. We need to forgive the children in us who were so innocent and undeserving of blame. What a cruel irony that we need to forgive the blameless. Yet we must let our inner children know that we forgive them because, like our parents, we have been blaming since time immemorial. Real forgiveness, as we will see in chapter 13, begins with the self. Forgiving our inner children is a powerful avenue into self-forgiveness. In the words of self-esteem guru Nathaniel Brandon, he says, when we learn to forgive the child we once were for what he or she did not know or couldn't do or couldn't cope with or felt or didn't feel, when we understand and accept that child was struggling to survive the best way he or she could, then the adult self is no longer in an adversarial relationship to the child self. One part is not at war with the another part. So there can be a lot of self-hatred for, the inner child in us because that's the truth of what happened. So we just carry it on and we just, bash that inner child ourselves. He says here, our inner child's heart, broken by a dearth of compassionate mothering, begins to heal when we turn inward with unconditional love and forgiveness. We add substance to the self-mothering by offering the child ongoing tenderness, listening, affection, and unconditional love. Consistently, in such practice is what allows our inner child to fully feel truly forgiven. We also enhance forgiveness by championing our inner child in a father-like way. We do this by using anger and blame to fight off internal or external aggression. So if you're aggressive to yourself or you have aggression coming outside from others, it's time that we protect our inner child. So if we're not going to do it for ourselves, we're going to do it for our inner child. And I'm fierce now with my inner child. I stand up for her, and I'm fierce. I do not let anybody critic it. So whereas I used to allow people to critic me, there's nothing wrong with healthy criticism, but where people are cruel and unkind, we've got to learn to have boundaries, and we will do that as we work with reparenting our inner child. It will become a natural thing that we'll do eventually, but it takes a long time because there's a lot of bouncing around in between flashbacks and whatever, the fight, flight, freeze, form response and other things that we do. But Pete Walker clearly says that the inner critic is the first thing that has to go. And if we love our inner child, then we're going to start getting rid of that inner critic as well. So then he says, we also enhance forgiveness by championing our inner child in a father-like way. We do this by using anger and blame to fight off internal or external aggression. Such actions prove to the child that she is not only forgiven, but she is no longer subject to unfair blame. So you maybe can think of all the times that you were blamed and you were innocent, or you were abused verbally, sexually, or physically as a child, and that you had nobody to stand up for you. And we replay that out as adults. So then he says, the efficacy of our reparenting is further enhanced by providing our inner children with the verbal, spiritual, and emotional nurturance outlined in Appendix A. I'm not going to read that now. I might read that bit tomorrow. He says, when we give our inner children love, understanding, and protection consistently over time, they begin to shed their horrible burdens of fear, shame, and emptiness. As we become more successful in resisting the shaming and terrorizing attacks of our internalized critical parents, our inner children begin to feel safe enough to come forth in all of their vital wonder and beauty. Normal qualities of human existence like joy, peacefulness, friendliness, spontaneity, and playfulness naturally begin to re-emerge as we master the practice of reparenting. My inner child is now free to reward me liberally with his childlike exuberance because years of consistent support during the difficult and painful times have convinced him that I truly am there for him. One of the most precious gifts I received from my inner child came through dialoguing with him about the past. His vivid Recollections of the joyfulness of time spent in nature and in playing sports inspired me to reevaluate these godsends of my youth into high priorities in my life. Nathaniel Brandon testifies to the attainability of this type of experience. He says, recognized, accepted, embraced, and thereby integrated, a child self can be magnificent, a magnificent resource that enriches our lives with its potential for spontaneity, playfulness, and imaginativeness. So I'll give you an example. What I did that for so long, I began to work with my inner child, getting rid of my inner critic, telling it to bugger off. That's my English terminology. I don't know what people would say in the US, but it's really saying, get out of my way. You know, I'm not listening to this voice that's making me feel like crap anymore. And the put downs and that, you know, you're not enough, or this is wrong with you, or that's because that's how my inner child was dealt with, or not my inner child, but me as a child. I wasn't nurtured or supported. So as an adult in the reparenting, eventually we'll begin to bring this different voice in. And with that, we'll begin to flourish and we'll begin to love ourselves. And we won't then allow others to mistreat us because we're in protection mode, not overprotection, we're in healthy protection mode. And we've got a healthy sense of self and we begin to regain our self-esteem. A lot of people are walking around, you know, shattered inside with low self-esteem, on anxiety pills, having flashbacks, nightmares, some people not able to leave their house. Some of us, you know, overeating, undereating, disassociating, which was a form of behavior to keep us safe. So if you were sexually abused, as an example, or beaten every other day, or, you know, even a few times, those memories stay with you. And you can, you know, it's very hard to deal with life as an adult when those things have happened, because somewhere in the back of the mind, as a child, we're a sponge and we've soaked up all of those beliefs and conditioning. You know, we're taught how to cross the road. That's still with us as an adult. We don't have to think about how to cross the road. So the beliefs and the things that were said to us, they're conditioned into us. They're in our psyche and they play out whether we see them or not. And when we begin to get rid of the inner critic bit by bit and get rid of that voice, like in a forceful manner, we begin to balance out and we get healthier. And that is psychoeducation. I mean, I'm in therapy at the moment, but I can tell you these books that I've been reading have really helped me, and coming on YouTube, reading these books, and letting, you know, reading these for other people is helping me also, because it's a refresher to my brain what I'm doing for myself as well, because it's easy to forget these things until they're really solid in us. It takes years to undo some of the damage that's been done. So he goes on to say, he said, this is about talking to and for the inner child. Continuing reading. And if anybody's out there, I can't see who's there. That's a good thing with YouTube. You don't see who's there, but you do see how many viewers there are. So I've got 3. So thank you for watching me, whoever it is. And if you feel you want to ask questions, you can always email me, or you can go over to my Facebook page as well, because I think these live chats, because of the subject, people don't particularly want to live chat on these streams, but it's okay. But thank you. So here goes, talking to and for the inner child. We heal ourselves with self-fathering when we use our anger and blame to challenge inner messages of shame and self-hate. Speaking up in a protective way for the inner child makes it safe enough for her to once again, or he, to inhabit consciousness. You might benefit from reviewing the self-talk techniques in chapter 7 that show us how to protect the inner child from the attacks of the inner critic parent. Toxic shame often erupts with no warning. And I found this, you know, it just comes out of nowhere, this toxic shame. He says, I try to father and defend my child at such times by rejecting these echoes of my parents' shaming messages. I explain to him that my parents have and have had no right to talk to him that way. If I have numbly repeated the lies and shamings of my old authority figures, I apologize to him and recommit to eliminating this old self-destructive habit. I usually supplement my self-fathering with the kind of mothering that feeds self-esteem, with positive and supportive statements. I imagine my inner child sitting on my lap or resting in my heart, and I remind him that he is absolutely and what does that say? Let's see. And eminently lovable just as he is. And then I soothe him with words of this nature. So I'm going to read, this is what Pete Walker does. And I'll tell you what I do for me. Lately, this year, I go round and I like taking pictures of flowers with my iPhone, the streets that as I go, wherever I go, I enjoy doing that. And the thing that I found was, I imagine now that my little child is with me. Thank you, Tammy. I can see you there. I'm going to read what Pete Walker says in a minute, but thank you for being here. So I used to rush everywhere in my fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. I'd rush everywhere, like I'm, completely freaked out by life. And I didn't understand that I was experiencing the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. And the 4 F's will be below this video. There's a list for 13 steps for managing flashbacks. And there's also 14 tips for managing your inner critic. So you can print those off. You can go to Pete Walker's webpage and just print them off. And what I do now is I imagine me as a little girl, like 4 years old, and she's with me, and I slow down. I sort of take her hand and I slow down, and I enjoy my time, imaginary, my little girl. I'm not rushing around like a maniac. I've got a lot of love and awareness that I've got this inner me that's a beautiful child that needs nurturing because she had none. So that really is something that becomes natural. The more you do it, the more natural it becomes. It's like soothing, when we feel tearful or upset or we're having a nightmare, soothing that inner child. And it does become normal and natural. So this is what Pete Walker said. His words of this nature. He says, words of this nature. He says, I love to have you near me, Pete. You are such a joy to me. I love it when you talk to me and tell me how it is for you. I want to hear everything that you have to say, and I want to be the one person you can always come to whenever you need help. You can come to me when you are hurting, when you just want company, or when you want to play. You are always welcome. You are a delight to my eyes, and I always enjoy having you around. You are a good boy, or you can say a good girl, very special and absolutely worthy of love, respect, and all the good things. I am so proud of you and so glad that you are alive. I will help you in any way that I can. I want to be the loving mum and dad you were so unfairly deprived of and that you so much deserve. And I want you to know that I have an especially loving place in my heart for you when you are scared or sad or mad or ashamed. You can always come to me and tell me about such feelings. And I will be with you and try to soothe you until those feelings run their natural course. I want to become your best friend, and I will always try to protect you from unfairness and humiliation. I will always seek friends for you who genuinely like you and who are truly on your side. We will only befriend people who are fair. This is really important. We will only befriend people that are fair, who treat us with equality and respect, and who listen to us as much as we listen to them. I want to help you learn that it is good to have needs and desires. It's wonderful that you have feelings. It's healthy to be mad and sad and scared and depressed at times. It's natural to make mistakes, and it's okay to feel good too, and even to have more fun than mum and dad did. So this is our inner parent. I can see Joy there. Joy is aware. Okay, thanks for being there. I'm going to continue reading. So I've got a Facebook page for ladies group, anxiety and PTSD on Facebook, which is just for ladies. But there are groups I know where men can join who've been through childhood trauma as well. So if you're a gentleman and you want to, find out what those groups are, you can also find me on Facebook, and my private page is public. So you can message me there if you need a few groups that you can join of like-minded people that are in the mode of healing and doing the inner work, getting rid of anxiety and complex PTSD. So back to reading. He says, at other times, when my heart opens to my inner child, I tell him how much I wish I could have saved him from the constant yelling and hitting. I remind him that I feel especially tender towards him when he cries or gets angry about how much he got picked on and knocked around by the many adults that had power over him. I also remind him of my patience and empathy for his fear around the unknown adults. How could he not sometimes flash back in fear, afraid of being suddenly slapped or criticized by them? I reassure him that I will never allow anyone to abuse him again. No one will ever be allowed to slap him with a hand or with words. I remind him that I have healthy anger now and that can be summoned up to ward off and write off abusers. Because what a lot of the sad thing is that being so abused, we end up as adults, and I've done it myself so many times, going into relationships that are just so, just end up being so abusive, where people are critical, unkind, not interested in your needs. And there's a lot out there, like people, say it's narcissism. But I think the issue is that if we do our inner child work, then what we begin to make different choices because we're in protection mode. And if somebody's abusive, then we've got such a boundary, not a wall, but we have a boundary to say, hey, don't speak to me like that. But if we've been through abuse and we're not doing the psychoeducational work, then we basically don't change behavior. So the books, again, are below in this video. It's Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. That's the first one I got. And then the book I'm reading from now is The Tao of Fully Feeling, which was harder book for me to read. Not harder, but it's a bigger book. And it was, I'm not saying it was harder, that's the wrong word. It was just a bit more it was more in depth in a different way. Both good though. And that's what I'm reading from right now, The Tao of Fully Feeling. So then he goes on to say, I don't know if I've just read this bit, but I'm going to read it again. He says, when we constantly give our inner children the kind of support, we suffer less and less paralysis from toxic shame. We become skilled at transforming the inverted anger of self-hatred into a defense against the critical parent. Parental rulership of our psyches gradually dissipates, and we are able to treat normal mistakes as learning experiences rather than as proof of our defectiveness. The demon of perfectionism loses its grip on our psyches, and we begin to cherish our differences and our imperfections as unique treasures of character and being that they are. And if you look, every flower that exists is different, every tree that exists is different, and every human being is different, So we don't need to be like other people. That's the other thing. We don't need to ever measure ourselves against another human being. So he goes on to say, I have been so healed through this process that I now value many things about myself that were formerly perpetual sources of shame and self-abandonment. What I used to disparage as my moodiness now strikes me as an emotional richness and flexibility. My need for considerable introversion, which used to be my all-time greatest defect. And I will say, I like spending a lot of time on my own, and people, I had friends saying to me, why don't you go out? Why don't you go and meet somebody? Why don't you? And, and I used to think it was a defect that I like being on my own, but actually I love being on my own. So, I do go out and I go and get a coffee and I do all sorts of things, but at home, I definitely like living on my own. So it's not a defect, but we're told things are defects. And I find that people, if I tell a friend in the past that I'm sad, they'll sort of tell me that I'm a defective. They're not my friends anymore, those people, though, I can tell you that. Going on, he says, my need for considerable introversion, which used to be my all-time greatest defect, has now become the much appreciated matrix of my rich inner life. My streak shooting in basketball no longer sends me down the drain of toxic shame, although I will probably always prefer the hot streaks to the cold ones. Moreover, I can now savor my few remaining addictions, non-stop gum chewing, long telephone conversations, daily grilled cheese sandwiches, writing with ink in books, and crying at sentimental movies. I can also graciously accept the moans that I occasionally evoke in others via my habit of telling bad jokes. Even my feelings of inferiority about my appearance have almost totally vanished. I now feel like the imperfections that for many years made me feel so ugly that I wouldn't dare approach the opposite sex. I have grown to love my freckles, my leanness, my oft broken nose, my eyebrows that grow together, and the big space between my front teeth. And perhaps best of all, I now frequently hear a voice that automatically says, I love you. And that's something I do to myself now. Like, people it's quite a funny one because I do that. And, you know, I used to look in the mirror and hate myself, this self-hatred, you know, but now, you know, whatever I look like, you know, when we get out of bed and we've, you know, in the middle of the night and we look in the mirror and the hair's everywhere and we, you know, we've got no makeup on or whatever for the girls anyway. You know, I don't judge myself anymore. I see the beauty in myself. And if we look at children, you know, and as I was out today walking, it's really hot in London today. It's our hottest day so far, thankfully. We've finally, summer's arrived. But, you know, just seeing everybody's different and we've all got beauty in us. Every single human being has something beautiful about them. And we need to appreciate that in ourselves and stop judging ourselves against other people. I mean, Instagram and stuff like that can give us hell, you know. Everybody looks like they're all in the gym and they've all got flat stomachs and they've all, you know, eating great food and doing great things. And we all know that's BS. It's not the reality. You know, everybody has to go to bed at night and sleep and, you know, has health issues and all sorts of things. So we need to be really tender with ourselves and love ourselves like we would if it was our own child. Like, I don't have a child, but I love my inner child. She is beautiful. I adore her. And nobody is, you know, going to mess with her. That's where I'm at on that one, which is great because what that's done is lifted my self-esteem to such a point that I will stand up for myself, you know, and I will do it gracefully, but I will do it. So I'm going to continue. Okay. He says, and perhaps best of all, I now frequently hear a voice that automatically says, I love you instead of nice going, klutz, whenever I accidentally drop or bump into something. I have also noticed that since my inner critic lost its job as boss of my consciousness, I am now less critical and perfectionately expectant of others. So that means we stop putting the perfection thing on other people. When we stop doing it to ourselves, we'll stop doing it to other people as well. He says, I believe this has made me safer and more comfortable to be around. Others seem to be able to be more authentic and vulnerable with me. This in turn creates a mutuality of safety and authenticity that allows me to make new friends on an ongoing basis. As new friends come into my life, my sense of self-belonging increases and now begins to feel like something comfortably tribal. I feel as though the enormous loneliness of my loveless youth has largely dissipated, and it continuously decreases as my social network expands through meeting good people from all walks of life, formerly limited to only engaging with those who closely mirrored my beliefs and values. I now find myself enjoying an ever enlarging sample of people. How fascinating our diversity in responding to the complexities of human existence. One of my greatest delights is being a therapist. This is Pete Walker speaking. He says, witnessing my clients making similar gains in their lives through reparenting. Many develop trustworthy relationships for the first time in their lives. And that's just happened to me. Like, I'm 53, I was 53 on the 21st of May. And this is the first time in my life I can honestly say I've got some good, solid, lovely people around me that are not picking holes in me, that love me and they care about me. And, you know, and I feel the same about the people that I know. So the inner child work and getting rid of the inner critic, it's top of the list. He says, many wake up from years of stagnation to become wholeheartedly excited about the new endeavors of old reclaimed enthusiasm. How wonderful it is when a client comes in proudly reporting that over the last weekend, she flew a kite, made a friend, climbed a tree, took a dance class, started a garden, went roller skating, frolicked on the water slides, enrolled in the arts and crafts, or identified 15 different kinds of wildflowers on camping trips. So for me, I'm going to read this bit on self-mothering. There's one little section here, and then I'm going to continue with the rest of this chapter tomorrow. So the beginning of self-mothering, he says here, Marion Woodman said this. He says, if we have lived behind a mask all of our lives, sooner or later, if we are lucky, that mask will be smashed. Perhaps we will look into the terrified eyes of our own teeny child, that child who has never known love and who now beseeches us to respond. So that's Marion Woodman. I haven't read any of her books, but she is a writer. And then the next one is Jean Houston. This is in Pete Walker's book I'm reading from. He says, the violation of the natural weakness and simplicity of the young child. These wounds may be redeemed through the natural simplicity of loving indeed, that they may offer the gateway through which love may enter. So because we were not given that love, we have to give it to ourselves. And, you know, we throw around this like, oh, you've just got to love yourself. You just got to let it go. You've just got to forgive. You've just got to, you know, forgive your abusers and then everything's going to be fine. And it doesn't work that way. It's bloody hard work. You know, I went through years of nightmares and flashbacks, and, you know, I've had a couple of nightmares this week. But when I wake up at night, I think because I'm having psychoanalysis through my doctor, I'm halfway through, it was a year and a half, trauma psychoanalysis. It's been a beautiful, wonderful thing that I've done, and the books that I've come across. And I've been lucky enough to speak to Pete Walker, who wrote these books. I've had 3 consultations with him over the last year, and his webpage is below. And if you want any more information, you can come over to my ladies group on Facebook, or for the guys, you can send me a message and I'll let you know what groups are great for you to join there. But we're a work in progress. Healing is not all or nothing. So when you have a bad day and you feel angry and tearful and you're going into your fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, just know that, you know, that's part of it. We're not, you know, we have good days, we have bad days. People who've not been through abuse have good days and bad days. They get out the wrong side of the bed, so to speak. So you can imagine that if, you know, if we took a child and we abused it for like 12 years, sexually, verbally, and physically, you know, what are we going to expect that child to be like as an adult? You know, and what would we do? How would we repair that? We would begin to love and care and be kind. That is the way through this. So that's it. I'm going to go. I hope I've got Tammy there. Thank you, Tammy, for being here. And Joy is aware. I think that's a good one. All right, so that's it. I'm going, and I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll hit the notification button or subscribe as well, and you'll get an update of when I'm doing my lives. Thank you for watching. Catch you later.